The Pacific night was so still that even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Inside USS Gato, the air carried the metallic taste of recycled oxygen, oil fumes, and the quiet tension of 50 men waiting for something they could not see. The only sound came from the steady hum of the electric motors, soft, almost comforting, like a heartbeat beneath steel. Dim red lights bathed the control room, turning every face into a mask of concentration. The men spoke in whispers, not because they needed to, but because silence felt like a shield in the dark. At the center of it all stood Lieutenant Commander Robert "Bob" Harrison. Thin, calm, and almost unervingly composed, Harrison rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. His crew trusted him the way a man trusts the edge of a knife, sharp, dangerous, but reliable when everything else fails. Tonight, he was staring at the chart table, where pencil lines traced the predicted route of a Japanese convoy. 6 transports, 2 escorts, 1 tanker. Enough tonnage to feed an entire island garrison for weeks. If this convoy passed untouched, it might stabilize the enemy's defensive line. If it vanished, the collapse would begin. But hitting such a fleet came with a cost. Japanese escorts in this sector were veterans, fast, disciplined, and armed with sonar that was finally catching up to American submarine tactics. A single mistake could seal the boat's fate 300 feet beneath the surface. Harrison tapped the chart lightly with 2 fingers. This is where they'll be. And they won't expect us this far north. His voice was low, measured. A man thinking 3 moves ahead. His executive officer, Lieutenant Parker, frowned. "Sir, we're outside the assigned patrol zone." "I know." Parker hesitated. "Calm subpack will ask questions." Harrison looked up just enough for the red lights to reflect in his eyes. "Not if we bring them results." It wasn't bravado. It was calculation. Harrison had been studying Japanese convoy behavior for months. Patterns invisible to most officers, timing, spacing, radio habits, small corrections in course, were now etched into his mind. And tonight, he saw something others didn't, a gap in the enemy's expectations. A blind spot. A place where a single submarine could slip in, strike hard, and vanish before the ocean even registered the violence. "Make turns for 3 knots. Ahead slow," Harrison whispered. The order traveled softly through the submarine. The Gato eased forward like a predator gliding just beneath the surface of a black mirror. Men held their breath without meaning to. And for the first time, Harrison considered the weight of the decision he had just made, an unauthorized maneuver, risky enough to end his career or his life. But if his intuition was right, this single choice could alter the entire logistics chain keeping Japan's war machine alive. No one else knew yet. But this was the moment, the quiet, almost invisible moment, when the tide of the Pacific War began to shift. Deep in the dark, USS Gato moved toward the convoy that didn't know it was already doomed. Before USS Gato slipped north of its assigned patrol zone, the larger truth of the Pacific War was brutally simple. Japan lived or died by what its merchant ships could carry. Oil from the Dutch East Indies. Rubber. Tin. Bauxite. Food for garrisons scattered across thousands of miles. Every island, every airfield, every factory depended on cargo ships moving across open water. Slow, predictable, vulnerable. Japan didn't have the industrial depth to replace them. Once a ship went down, it was gone forever. American commanders knew this. What they didn't know, at least not in 1942, was how to exploit it effectively. Early submarine patrols had been hesitant, scattered, and crippled by a hidden enemy in their own torpedoes, the Mark 14. It ran too deep. It failed to detonate. And sometimes, disastrously, it circled back. Submarine crews whispered about it with a mix of anger and exhaustion. Weeks spent stalking a convoy, only to fire a perfect spread, and watch every torpedo fail like a bad joke. But by early 1943, things were changing. Crews were more experienced, tactics more refined, and commanders like Harrison, young, sharp, unafraid to challenge doctrine, were emerging. The Gato-class boats were the American answer to long-range submarine warfare. They were not elegant. They were not quiet by modern standards, but they were built with something far more valuable: range and endurance. A Gato could roam the Pacific for 10,000 miles without refueling. It carried 24 torpedoes, more than many German U-boats. It had radar, a luxury most navies envied. And its pressure hull tolerated depths that often saved its crew when depth charges rained down. The men inside these steel tubes came from farms, factories, universities, and small towns. They learned to live with sweat, diesel fumes, condensation dripping from pipes, and the constant awareness that one rupture in the hull would end everything in less than a second. Yet morale in the submarine force was strangely high, because everyone aboard knew something most of the Navy still didn't fully grasp. Submarines would decide the Pacific. Not through big battles. Not through heroics on beaches. But through mathematics. Tonnage sunk. Convoys disrupted. Fuel denied. Production strangled. And now, Harrison believed he had found a way to accelerate that collapse. His unauthorized move north wasn't recklessness. It was pattern recognition. 4 months, Japanese traffic through that area had shifted just slightly, nothing dramatic, but enough for Harrison to see a rhythm emerging, a convoy every 9 to 11 days, hugging a route not officially charted. Most commanders ignored small anomalies. Harrison lived for them. Inside Gato, crewmen checked gauges, wiped condensation, monitored sonar, and tried not to think about the danger of operating so close to enemy lanes. They didn't know the full risk their commander had taken. Not yet. What they did know was this: Harrison had a reputation for getting results. Quietly. Efficiently. Almost unnervingly so. And if he said the enemy would be here, then something was coming. Something big enough that even the water around them felt colder. Above them, the ocean stretched black and silent. Ahead of them, Japan's lifeline flowed through the darkness. And USS Gato, riding deep and patient, prepared to cut it. At 2:17, a faint pulse echoed through the sonar headphones, so weak that most operators would have dismissed it as background noise. But Seaman First Class Howard Krantz had been on enough patrols to recognize the difference between the ocean's natural heartbeat and something mechanical, something alive. He lifted one finger. Contact, maybe multiple. The control room fell to an instant hush. Harrison's head turned, calm but focused. Range. Krantz closed his eyes, listening. Long, very long. But steady. A convoy. Exactly where Harrison had said it would be. The bridge crew exchanged quiet glances. No one spoke the obvious. They were in the right place because their commander had broken protocol. No one objected now. Harrison leaned over the chart again, but this time his posture changed, less contemplative, more predatory. Helm, come right to 240. Ahead 1/3. Keep us deep and quiet. The Gato shifted course, almost imperceptibly, like a shark adjusting its trajectory. Sonar pulses grew clearer. Engines. Propeller beats. Water displacement. Not one ship. Not two. A whole formation. As the pattern sharpened, picture emerged. Transports in a staggered column, an oiler behind them, 2 escorts flanking the group, a classic Japanese, screened, formation. "Sir," Parker said softly, "we can't attack from this depth. Escorts will pick up our screws if we come too close." Harrison didn't respond immediately. His mind was triangulating movement, speed, angles, performing geometry under pressure. Old commanders relied on doctrine. Harrison relied on instinct sharpened by math. He looked up. They don't expect us to be ahead of them. They're scanning astern and off the flanks. Parker frowned. So we let them walk into us. It wasn't what the manual said. It wasn't how the Navy taught approach tactics. But it matched Harrison's talent, making the enemy reveal themselves. "Bring us to periscope depth. Slow rise. No cavitation," Harrison ordered. The boat ascended carefully. Men held onto pipes and valves as the hull creaked from pressure changes. Even the metal seemed to understand that stealth was now survival. When the periscope finally pierced the surface, Harrison rotated it with controlled, almost tender precision. One sweep, two sweeps, and then, shadows. Massive silhouettes crawling across the horizon. Black shapes blotting out faint starlight. 12 minutes later, the picture was complete. A tanker loaded deep in the water, 3 transports carrying troops or supplies, and 2 destroyers, fast, agile, lethal. The kind of formation meant to sustain an entire campaign. Harrison whispered, "We're going to take the heart first." Parker's eyes widened. "The tanker." Harrison nodded. "We kill the fuel, the rest becomes irrelevant." It was a ruthless decision. But war at sea was mathematics with human consequences. He lowered the periscope. "Torpedo room, stand by for a 4-shot spread. Tubes 1 through 4. A quiet, "Aye, sir," traveled through the boat. Every man felt the shift. The hunt was no longer theoretical. This was happening. Engines hummed at barely a whisper. Sonar pulses grew closer, like approaching footsteps in the dark. The control room glowed red and tense. USS Gato slid into position, silent, invisible, deadly. What came next would be seconds of violence born from hours of calculation. The control room felt smaller as the convoy drifted into the perfect firing angle. The Gato moved at barely 2 knots, just enough to maintain steerage. Every sound seemed amplified. The soft tap of a pencil, the clink of a valve handle, the pulse of the boat's electric motors. Harrison stood at the periscope again. Short, controlled glances. No wasted movement. Range, 1,800 yards, angle on the bow, 080 speed, 8 knots. Each word came out calm, steady, as if the convoy were a predictable equation unfolding in real time. Parker leaned in. "Escorts still holding their pattern, sir. They haven't seen us." "They won't," Harrison replied quietly. "Not from this bearing." He adjusted the scope, tracking the tanker. Its masthead lights were blacked out, but the sheer bulk of the ship made it impossible to miss. A dark mountain sliding across the horizon. Harrison lowered the scope. "Open outer doors. Tubes 1 through 4. A muffled sequence of metallic thunks echoed from the forward torpedo room. Men felt the vibration in their ribs. "Solution ready," the fire control party whispered. Harrison exhaled slowly. "Fire 1." A muted hiss. The boat shuddered gently. A white trail of bubbles burst outward on the surface far above them. "Fire 2." Another hiss. Another subtle tremor. "Fire 3." "Fire 4." 4 torpedoes now ran silently through the dark water, 4 steel decisions moving toward the tanker with mathematical certainty. Inside the boat, watches ticked louder than ever. Even breathing felt intrusive. "Torpedoes running hot and straight," the fire control man confirmed in a hushed voice. At the 60-second mark, there was still nothing. At 75 seconds, someone swallowed hard. At 85, the tension in the room became almost physical. Then, a deep, rolling thud. Not loud, but unmistakable. Followed by a second. Stronger. Rising through the hull. Then a third. A fourth. The Gato vibrated from the distant shock waves. Harrison didn't smile, but his eyes changed, just slightly. A confirmation of everything he had calculated. "Good hits," Parker whispered. But Harrison wasn't looking at the tanker anymore. He was watching the escorts. Through the periscope, he saw their searchlights snap on, slicing the darkness into frantic angles. Their bows turned sharply. Their screws churned white wakes into the sea. "They're guessing wrong," Harrison murmured. "They think the attack came from astern." It was the moment he had predicted, the moment that made his earlier decision so dangerous and so brilliant. Most American commanders attacked from behind a convoy, the classic approach. Escorts expected that, searched for it, trained for it. But Harrison attacked from ahead, from the blind spot, from the place no one looked. He stepped back from the scope. "Take us down." 250 feet. Rig for silent running. The diving alarm didn't ring. Harrison had forbidden it. Everything had to stay quiet. Valves whispered. Hull plates creaked. Lights dimmed further. The Gato slid beneath the thermal layer, into colder, denser water where sonar struggled to reach. Above them, explosions echoed. Depth charges dropped not toward them, but toward empty ocean behind the convoy. The tanker burned on the surface, a vast column of flame illuminating the night like a floating inferno. Men on the transports shouted, scrambled, pointed. Chaos rippled through the entire formation. Below, enveloped in darkness, Harrison whispered to Parker. "That was the first. We're not done." The cat leveled off at 250 feet, but the hull still groaned softly as the boat settled into the cold layer. The red lights flickered once, just a momentary voltage dip, but enough to remind every man on board that steel, for all its strength, is only a thin barrier between life and the crushing weight of the Pacific. "All stop," Harrison ordered. The electric motors wound down, fading into a barely audible hum. Silence became the new atmosphere. 2 destroyers above were now fully committed, engines screaming, propellers biting the water. They swept back and forth behind the convoy like wolves racing through brush, blind and furious. "They still think we're aft," Parker whispered. "For now," Harrison said. "They'll correct soon." Sonar confirmed it. Krantz's voice came through the sound-powered phones, low and tense. "High-speed screws, closing fast, 2 bearings." Harrison rested a hand on the chart table. He wasn't looking at it now, just grounding himself. "Range. 3,000 yards and closing. Both are zigzagging hard." Silence again. Then the first pattern of depth charges hit the water. The explosions came distant at first, muffled booms that trembled through the hull like distant thunder. But each pattern crept closer as the destroyers recalibrated their search. Inside the submarine, the atmosphere changed. Voices became whispers. Hands trembled just slightly as men tightened straps or held onto warm pipes. Condensation dripped from overhead valves like a steady rain. In the forward torpedo room, a machinist's mate murmured, "They get the right bearing and we're done." Across the compartment, another said quietly, "Harrison's never been wrong before." Back in the control room, Parker leaned toward his commander. "If they get a good sonar return, they'll bracket us. We can't maneuver without noise." Harrison nodded once. "We're not going to maneuver." Parker blinked. "Sir, we let them come. We stay silent. We make them doubt." It was counterintuitive. Every instinct in submarine warfare screamed to evade, to slip away, to reposition. But Harrison's logic ran deeper. If they stayed still within the thermal layer, noise would distort, bearings would drift, and sonar operators above would lose confidence. But it was a gamble. A still target was an easy target, if detected. Another pattern dropped. This time closer. The boat lurched violently. Dust and paint chips fell from the overhead. A wrench clattered across the deck until a sailor lunged to catch it. Breath held, teeth clenched. Krantz reported again. "One destroyer turning. Think they're confused." Second one crossing his wake. Harrison allowed himself a single, controlled breath. Confusion meant survival. But the convoy was still moving away. If Gato waited too long, the remaining transports would slip out of reach, escorted and alert. The window for a second strike was closing fast. He turned to Parker. "We're going up again." Parker stared at him. "Sir, if we rise now, they're sweeping aft. Their arcs don't overlap yet. We'll slide right between them. That's risky. It's worse to let that convoy escape." Parker hesitated only a second, then nodded. He trusted Harrison even when the decisions felt impossible. "Bring us to periscope depth. Slow rise. Silent trim," Harrison ordered. The Gato began its ascent, every man feeling the shift in pressure like a hand squeezing the hull. The destroyers thundered overhead, engines roaring, screws chopping the water in frantic patterns. But they didn't hear Gato. Not yet. And in that narrow, fragile space between detection and escape, Harrison moved his boat back toward the convoy. Back toward ships that still didn't know the first attack hadn't been the last. The ocean above shimmered faintly as the Gato broke into periscope depth. The boat rose so quietly that even the ballast vents whispered instead of hissed. Every man on board knew this ascent was a gamble, like standing up during an artillery barrage and hoping the next shell wasn't meant for you. "Stand by," Harrison murmured, lowering his voice instinctively even though sound didn't travel up through water. "Scope coming up." He raised the periscope slowly, carefully, avoiding a telltale wake on the surface. One quick sweep. Another. A third, longer, deliberate. The tanker was gone, burning wreckage scattered across the waves, flames spitting tiny sparks into the night sky. But the damage was deeper than fire. The convoy had broken formation. Perfect. The transports had pulled wide, unsure of the threat's origin. The escorts were still racing aft, chasing a phantom attacker that didn't exist. And in the chaos, the largest transport, the one riding highest in the water, likely carrying troops, had drifted slightly out of line. A gap. A vulnerability. A doorway. Harrison called out quietly. Angle on the bow, 045. Range, 2,200 yards. Speed, 6 knots. Parker leaned forward. "Sir, escorts are turning." "Not toward us," Harrison whispered. "They're chasing ghosts." He had minutes, maybe less, before the Japanese regrouped. Torpedo room, tubes 5 and 6. Set for a 2-shot spread. Magnetic exploders off. No one questioned the final instruction. After the failures of the early war, American submarine captains trusted contact detonators, not theory. Up scope. Harrison observed again. The transport's silhouette slid across the lens, a black shape lumbering forward, unaware that death was rising beneath it. "Solution ready," the fire control team whispered. He gave a single nod. "Fire 5." A controlled jolt. The shot ran clean. "Fire 6." Another jolt. Another silver trail slicing through the black water above. The room froze. Every second became a lifetime. Krantz counted softly under his breath, timing the run by instinct as much as by calculation. 50 seconds. 60. 70. Then, a blast. Sharp. Violent. The transport erupted in a column of water and debris. A second explosion followed, deeper, tearing into the hull. The ship's bow lifted unnaturally, then dropped like a dying animal. Dim lights flickered along its superstructure. Men ran across the deck, tiny silhouettes in total panic. In the control room, Parker whispered, 2 hits. But Harrison was focused on something else. Movement. He snapped the periscope to the right. The nearest escort had turned. Hard. "They saw the muzzle flash on the surface," Harrison said. Parker's heartbeat kicked. "Sir, they're closing fast." Harrison's voice remained steady. "Take us down. Full dive. All ahead flank, just until we break the layer." The dive alarm stayed silent as always. Crewmen braced themselves. Valves hissed softly as ballast tanks flooded. The Gato pitched downward. "Passing 50 feet, the plainsman reported. 80. 100. The ocean grew darker. Colder. Safer, if only for a moment. Then the destroyer arrived overhead. The first depth charges hit the water with the unmistakable splash picked up by sonar. Seconds later, the explosions came, closer, sharper, harder than before. The submarine shook violently. A gauge shattered. Someone cursed under his breath. A light bulb popped, plunging the aft passageway into darkness. But the hull held. And the Gato kept sliding deeper. "To 40 feet, the plainsman said. Harrison nodded. "Hold depth. Rig for ultra-quiet." The destroyers swept back and forth, dropping patterns in every direction except the right one. The ocean echoed with violence, but no explosion came close enough to find the Gato. After 5 long minutes, Krantz spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Contacts, moving away." Parker exhaled slowly. "Sir, we got them." Harrison didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Not yet," he said. "But we broke their spine." Above them, the convoy limped forward, 2 ships gone, 3 damaged, escorts exhausted and confused. Below them, Harrison prepared for the part of the mission no one ever celebrated, surviving the night. For the next hour, the Pacific became a world of pressure, darkness, and patience. The Gato held at 240 feet, drifting silently through the cold layer as the destroyers continued their desperate search above. The boat was quiet, not ordered silence, but the kind that grows naturally when 50 men realize that any vibration, any tool dropped, any wrong adjustment might be the sound that gets them killed. Condensation gathered on every pipe and bolt, dripping rhythmically onto the deck. Sweat beaded on foreheads despite the cold. The air smelled of oil, damp uniforms, and the stale bite of recycled CO2. The atmosphere felt thick enough to grip with a hand. "Contacts, fading," Krantz said softly. "Course?" Harrison asked. "They're spreading out, sir. Wide patterns. Looks like they're trying to box us in." Parker exhaled slowly. "If they close the box, we'll have to go deeper." Harrison shook his head. "No. We stay here. Sir, we're at the edge of safe depth." "Exactly. And no captain expects a submarine to sit this still on the edge of its envelope." It was a psychological trick as much as a tactical one. Hunters searched where they believed prey would flee, not where prey would gamble on staying. Minutes dragged. Small creaks echoed along the hull like distant whispers. Every sound felt amplified inside a boat built to contain silence. In the aft torpedo room, 2 sailors passed notes instead of speaking. In the engine room, machinists' mates monitored gauges by touch rather than turning on extra lights. In the control room, Harrison stood perfectly still, one hand on the chart table, the other resting near the dive controls. He didn't fidget. He didn't shift his weight. He simply waited, like a statue carved from calmness. Parker watched him for a moment. "You always know exactly how far to push," he whispered. Harrison's reply was soft. "I know how far they think we'll push." Above them, another pattern of charges detonated. The boat trembled. Dust drifted from overhead fittings. A pipe groaned under strain, just long enough for the chief of the boat to place a steadying hand against it, as if reassuring a nervous animal. Then, silence. Real silence. The destroyers were no longer closing. They were moving away, slowly, reluctantly, like predators leaving a kill site they're no longer convinced holds prey. Krantz confirmed it moments later. "Sir, I think they've lost us." Bearings widening. Engine screws fading. Harrison allowed himself a slow breath, almost inaudible. But survival wasn't guaranteed. Battery levels were dropping. Air quality was worsening. And the thermal layer that had protected them was also a trap, keeping them hidden, but also holding them down. "We need fresh air soon," Parker said. "Agreed," Harrison answered. "But not yet." He checked the chart. If Gato surfaced too soon, they risked silhouette detection from miles away. Wait too long, and they'd suffocate quietly beneath 240 feet of water. He made his decision. "We rise at 0430, Harrison whispered. "Ahead 1/3, slow ascent." No noise. The crew didn't cheer. They didn't smile. They didn't even speak. But a tiny shift rippled through the submarine, relief mixed with exhaustion, the kind that only comes after facing a long night and realizing you might live to see the dawn. As Gato eased upward, the hull creaking gently, the commander stepped back from the chart. For the first time in hours, he let himself think beyond survival. 2 ships destroyed. A convoy broken. Fuel denied. Supplies lost. And all from a single unauthorized decision. Quiet, unrecorded, invisible. A decision that might, just might, reshaped the entire campaign. Harrison whispered to himself, barely audible. 1 more mile. Then we breathe again. At 4:30, the Gato crossed the final feet of black water separating the crew from breathable air. The boat rose with the slow confidence of a survivor, scarred, tired, but intact. Surface. Standard trim, Harrison ordered softly. Moments later, the ballast tanks blew with a sharp metallic roar. The submarine broke through the surface in a sheet of cold spray, like a creature returning from a world where sound and sunlight didn't exist. Men rushed up the conning tower ladder, not cheering, not laughing, just inhaling long, grateful breaths of fresh Pacific air. The sky was a pale gray band along the eastern horizon. No flames. No escorts. No enemy ships. Only an empty sea, a sea cleared. Parker stepped onto the bridge, rubbing exhaustion from his eyes. Convoy's long gone. What's left of it, anyway? Harrison surveyed the horizon through binoculars. Even in the weak dawn light, you could still see a faint column of smoke far behind them, the last of the tanker burning itself out. We hurt them tonight, Parker added. Harrison didn't reply right away. He lowered the binoculars, the cold metal briefly resting against his chest. It wasn't about hurting them, he finally said. It was about cutting the line. Because that was the truth of the Pacific. The war wasn't won in headline battles alone. It wasn't just Midway or Guadalcanal. It wasn't only Marines on beaches, battleships firing broadsides, or carriers trading squadrons. It was this. Night. Silence. Mathematics. And commanders willing to see the ocean as a map of vulnerabilities. Over the next months, U.S. submarines would sink Japanese tankers faster than they could be built. By late 1944, the Empire's war machine would choke, not from lack of courage, not from defeat in a single battle, but from the slow, methodical paralysis of its maritime lifelines. And missions like Harrison's, quiet, uncelebrated, conducted in steel coffins, were the turning points that nobody saw. The Gato turned southeast toward deeper waters, beginning the long journey back to Midway. As the first light washed across the ocean, painting the waves gold, the crew finally allowed themselves to relax. In the control room, Krantz removed his headphones for the first time in hours. In the engine room, machinists' mates wiped oil from their hands and exchanged tired nods. In the torpedo room, sailors checked empty tubes, silent reminders of decisions that had hit their marks. Parker leaned on the bridge rail. "You think they'll ever know what really happened out here?" he asked. Harrison shrugged gently. "Maybe. Maybe not." He lifted the binoculars once more and looked across the calm horizon. "But it doesn't matter who knows," he said quietly. "What matters is that the war just shifted by a few thousand tons." And that was the essence of the submarine war. A tide turned not by noise, but by silence. Not by spectacle, but by invisible choices. Not by glory, but by men who fought in the dark and trusted that the results would speak for them. USS Gato sailed on, leaving no trace behind, only the lingering echo of a decision that would ripple far beyond the empty sea.